Yo guys, this is Luke, and this is my dream desk and home office setup for 2024. So apart from the location change, this setup might look pretty similar to my previous one. While my desk setup is always evolving, I really liked how the last one came together, and as a result, I spent most of my time refining more of the little things. So if you haven't already, make sure to check out my previous setup video and all the rest, because this has been a pretty in-depth process and I'm not going to cover every single product in this one video. I will, however, leave links to most of the things down below the like and subscribe buttons. But without any further ado, let's get right to it. For the paint color, this time around, I chose a swatch called Jet Black from Behr. It's a little less teal and leans more towards a neutral blue. Now, originally I wanted to go with more of a charcoal black color, but the particular paint I ended up choosing looked like a black mud and had a greenish undertone. I really didn't like it. So after several trips to Home Depot and a few coats later, I ended up with this. It's a bit darker than my previous Winter Way paint color from my last setup, but I felt like it complemented the space quite well. I had contemplated swapping out the disc plates on the wall for something else, but honestly, I already liked these nature ones so much that I just decided to keep them. I talked about them a little bit more in my previous setup video, so make sure to check out that one if you want more details. Anyways, due to the larger real estate of this particular wall, and after talking with Tom from Byte Review, by the way, he's pretty dope, make sure to check out his channel down below, I decided to go with these minimalistic looking wall shelves that I found on Amazon. They were really easy to hang up and only cost $20 for 3. Sitting on the top shelf, I have my open back Mackie MC450 studio monitors on this really nice walnut wood Grove made headphone stand. To the right of that sits the Divum Ditto. I made a video on this retro pixel art speaker a few years ago, and while I don't really use all of its functionality, I think it looks really nice as a statement piece. On the shelf below, I've got my first film camera, the Canon AE1, and next to it sits a really nice industrial looking touch lamp that I got on Amazon for around $22. Looking over to the left side of the wall, I have an out-of-time license plate from Back to the Future, which just so happens to be my absolute favorite movie. I don't know why it happens to be my absolute favorite movie, it just is my absolute favorite movie. I initially wanted to add something else to this side to sort of balance out the wall a little bit more, but I honestly couldn't really figure out what, so I just decided to leave it. If any of you guys have any recommendations or suggestions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Lastly, sort of tying in the whole wall together is the Govee Glide LED bar. I've already talked about this in nearly every one of my setups, but for the price and the aesthetic, it's hard to recommend anything else. This particular version of the Glide is extra long and has a few more bends, which just really frees up the amount of design combinations that you can choose. I went for this sort of handlebar mustache look, and I think it looks really nice and unique, and I actually haven't seen anyone do this before. Now, one of the great things about my new office is the extra wall space that isn't a part of the main setup. Over here on the left, there is a small gap between the window and the top of the ceiling, and at first I wasn't really sure what to do with this space, but eventually I landed on these 4 small Snoopy posters from Displate. You guys already know that Displate is my absolute favorite site for this kind of stuff, and these plates are no exception. All of these are from the same artist, which I will link down below, and I'm a huge fan of how they look. I guess Displate is an official partner of the Peanuts brand, and these Japanese-inspired Snoopy posters are just simply awesome. This is definitely one of my favorite new additions to the setup. Just to the left of that, I have this deconstructed Game Boy Color that was given to me as a gift from my friend Paul. I think this particular one is from a company by the name of X-Reart. Now, another area of this space that stumped me for quite some time was this smaller wall just to the right of the desk. Pretty much right away, I lined the trim here with another Govee Glide that I had from the previous setup, but the wall still felt pretty empty. After reaching out and talking with Tom from Byte Review once again, he suggested getting some of these wall-mounted bag hooks, which I did. These particular ones are from Amazon, and I believe they cost $25 for a pack of 3. They were really easy to install, and I like how the walnut wood and metal combination matches the rest of my desk. Let's move away from the main desk setup for a minute and talk about my workstation. The foundation of this part of the office is this workbench from Husky. I've wanted one of these for quite some time, and this one happened to be on sale at my local Home Depot for around $300 last summer. So I hauled all 400 pounds of it up 2 flights of stairs, nearly killing myself, my wife, and my friend Anthony in the process. But jokes aside, once it was finally here, it looked amazing. I would have preferred the matte black finish over this glossy look, but since it was on sale, I couldn't really argue. The top is made of a solid butcher block wood in a really nice bamboo colored finish. But I didn't just get this for the looks. Our current apartment is actually really small, and we don't have much storage space to begin with. So my main goal for this workbench was to use it to store all of my camera gear as well as my tools. What's great about the Husky is that it comes with this thin foam pre-installed, which means all of my gear stays in place when I open and close the drawers. And apart from that, it also has this built-in power strip on the right side. Now, to be honest, I'm not quite sure why the cable comes out the same side and not the back, but it doesn't really bother me that much. On the top, it's got one larger drawer, 6 smaller ones below it, and 2 large bin-like ones at the bottom. Honestly, this has just been a huge help storing random tech or other gadgets that I accrue over time. Turning our attention to the wall, I have another IKEA Scottish pegboard, but this time in black. Again, I absolutely love the way this looks, and it's really functional as well. I believe this is the 32 by 22 inch version, but they have several other sizes if that's something that you're interested in. I also have a Super Mario Bros. 3 painting held up by these rope bungee cords, which just looks so cool. Now, lighting up the pegboard is this RGBIC strip from Govee. I chose this particular one because it's meant to go on the back of a TV, and as a result has these gaps that lets you bend the strip around the square surface. This just so happens to fit almost perfectly and really adds a nice glow to the back of the pegboard. Oh, and I also relocated this white lamp from my second desk setup to here. Alright, so jumping back to the main setup, as similar as it looks, I've made quite a few changes, not the least of which is this extra large walnut desk shelf from Grovemade. Now, you guys already know that I'm a big proponent of their products. Every single item I've gotten from them has always been really high quality. So when Grovemade told me that they were making an extra large version of the desk shelf, I was incredibly excited. As much as I liked the shorter version, I always felt like I could make better use of more space. Unlike the previous version, this one no longer has the metal shelf running full length through the middle. Instead, it only goes part way and then terminates, revealing sort of this garage area. Now, while I haven't had the time or finances lately to get something to fit in here, I plan on filling it with an audio interface or amp and DAC setup sometime in the future. I also swapped out the larger desk organizer tray for these 2 smaller variants. I liked having the option of separating what things I kept here, and to be honest, just to keep things away from our cats. Grovemade also sent out a few more products my way, such as this note-taking kit that happens to be a collaboration between them and Matthew and Sina. Inside the kit comes a nice square notepad, as well as a vertical organizer and note display. These couple of items have to be one of my more used additions this year. I really like how I'm able to take notes and then store them either on the walnut vertical organizer or feature more recent ones on the notes display. Although, to be honest, recently I've been using it as an iPad Pro stand, and I actually think it works really well for that. Additionally, I switched out my gray felt desk pad for this matte black version in the medium plus size, also from Grovemade. As much as I like the felt desk pad, with cats it tended to cling onto hair, and I wanted something that would look clean and actually be easier to clean as well. Speaking of cleaning, I meant to add this in my previous setup video, but this is a high pressure electric duster that I picked up from Amazon a few years ago. It's so incredibly useful for basically any form of cleaning. I use it to dust out my PC from time to time, to clean my Steelcase Leap V2 chair, but most importantly, I use it nearly every week to dust off the desk from debris and mainly cat hair. Now, before we go any further, I want to take a moment to talk about cable management, as this is a question I've got quite a number of times. So, my setup is actually very simple. I'm using these really basic cable management trays that I picked up from Amazon. They just simply VHB mount to the bottom of the desk and hold all of my cables. I try to route the cables as best I can, but honestly, after a while, it just becomes a little bit too difficult. I'm of the mindset that what I don't see doesn't bother me, and these cable trays work really well and are super cheap. I think they cost around $20 for a pack of 6. Other than that, I just use a combination of zip ties, cable sleeves, and extension cables, and these small nail hooks that I found on Amazon. I actually don't love these things because they have a tendency to fall out of the IKEA countertop, so I probably recommend getting adhesive ones or ones with thinner nails. Lastly, I recently picked up these adhesive cable trays that are paintable. I use them to hide the massive cable from the Govee Glide and to hide the cable from the small industrial lamp that I have on the right shelf. Moving on over to peripherals, I swapped out my previous Akko 75B Plus for this Monsgeek M1W fully aluminum plate-mounted mechanical keyboard. I think this might be my favorite keyboard that I've used, period. The rotary encoder is stepped, which means changing the volume is really satisfying. This particular board is a 75% 82 key layout, which just so happens to be my favorite keyboard layout. I like how it's still very functional while also looking pretty minimalistic. The board also came with Akko Piano Black V3 linear switches pre-installed, and while I don't usually talk about switches all that often, I think these linear sound and feel really good. I'm also a big fan of the way these OEM profile double shot keycaps look. The key emblems are printed on the side, which means when the LEDs are off, you can't see them. This makes for a really clean and minimal look. I will say, however, that if you can't touch type, then they are a tad annoying, especially when trying to troubleshoot with the LEDs off. The board also features 3 different modes of communication: 2.4 GHz, Bluetooth, and wired, of course. Personally, I'm still using the coiled aviator cable I custom fabricated myself for my last setup, but I have confirmed that both other modes work great as well. Also, the 2.4 GHz connection has no perceivable latency, at least in my testing. The board also has a nice golden accent strip on either side, and this keyboard features a south-facing 5-pin hot swappable PCB, which means you won't get any interference with cherry-style keycaps. Oh, and also the stabilizers are plate-mounted and sound really great out of the box. I haven't lubed them or anything. The board also includes pour-on foam below the plate and above the bottom case, and all of this together makes for a really nice sounding and feeling typing experience. Possibly the only downside to this particular version of the keyboard is that it's not QMK or VIA compatible. I believe the wired version is, but don't quote me on that. Thankfully, the M1W does ship with Monsgeek's own software to control macros and RGB lighting, but I personally would have preferred to use VIA. Either way, it's not that big of a deal, as once it's all set up, everything works just fine. From there, I also swapped out my Logitech G305 wireless for this Razer Orochi V2 in black. It fits my hand really well and looks clean and minimal, and there isn't really much more I could ask for in a mouse. Now, 2 things that you may have noticed by now are the Spotify car thing and the Turnup Tech mixer. Let's talk about the Spotify car thing first. So as I was editing this video this week, Spotify just announced that they will be permanently disabling this device as of December of 2024 via an over-the-air update. This is incredibly frustrating for a number of reasons, and let me explain why. In my case, I purchased this device with the expectation of that it would continue to work even after being discontinued, and Spotify just thinks that they can basically say, hey, throw away the device. That's actually what they tell you to do in their FAQ, which is honestly ridiculous. If you own one of these, I highly recommend complaining to Spotify and maybe even reporting it to the FTC, as this is probably borderline fraud in some sense. Unfortunately, it does invalidate the next part of my video, but I decided to keep it in case some of you guys were interested, or maybe for whatever reason Spotify reverses their decision. Now, I know I'm going to get this question about how I mounted it in the comments, so basically what I did was take the CD player mount and shoved it straight into the desk shelf. For the most part, it sort of just pressure mounts right in and is fairly stable. However, unfortunately, mine is starting to get worn after bending it so many times, and it doesn't seem to fit as flush anymore. Now, what's weird about the design of the car thing is that it's meant to be paired with your phone via Bluetooth. However, I didn't want to have to repair my iPhone every time I wanted to sit down and listen to music at my desk, so I decided to link the car thing permanently with this cheap MP5 player that I had laying around. It's Android based, which means I was able to connect it to the car thing, no problem. If you're going to do this, I recommend using a device that you're not too attached to when it comes to battery life performance. I say this because ideally you'll want to have whatever device you choose, in my case the MP5 player, constantly on and charging, which will eventually degrade its battery life. Also, you'll want to turn off the automatic sleep settings, which I found out the hard way when the Spotify car thing would disconnect after not being used for a few hours. But again, once it was all set up, it worked great. Now, in order to use it with my PC, I do have to select the PC as a source in Spotify via my phone or desktop. Otherwise, it will play for the MP5 player under my desk by default. Again, this isn't a huge deal, especially when you consider that most of the time you're selecting music from your PC or phone to begin with. Now, there are several other features like playlist switching and Hey Spotify, which is Spotify's version of a voice assistant, but honestly, I primarily use this to skip tracks, like songs, and change the volume if I don't want to use the knob on my keyboard for some reason. Again, if you can find this for a good price, I think it looks really cool and is a great conversation starter. Now back to my volume mixer. Initially I was going to go with the more popular and cheaper PC Panel Mini from PC Panel, but I wasn't a huge fan of the design and I wanted something that looked a little cleaner. So after a little research, I found this, the TurnUpTech Volume Mixer. Weird name aside, what's really cool about this product is that apart from looking great, it lets you configure macros and volume control for certain applications or windows. Each knob is made of metal and feels quite premium, and the little volume bars are RGB IC addressable, which means you can change them to whatever color or animation you want. The buttons are also programmable, and the TurnUpTech software also has Voicemeeter, Streamlabs, OBS, and Razer Chroma integration, which just takes the customization up a whole nother level. While I don't stream all that often anymore, I could definitely see this being useful for switching between angles on OBS or changing your volume on Discord mid-stream without backing out into Windows. It is a little pricey at $85, but for the functionality and minimal look, I think it's well worth it. Initially, I had tried to mount it to the Grobe-made desk shelf like I did with the Spotify car thing, but VHB tape wasn't strong enough to hold it, and I don't have a 3D printer, so I wasn't able to fabricate a mount. I might try doing this in the future, and I'll probably make a post about it on Instagram or Twitter, so just make sure to follow me there. Alright, let's touch on the PC for a minute. So nothing's really changed about this build except for two very visual things. The first of which is this beautiful Height Y60 in the black colorway. I've wanted this case from the moment it was announced, and I think it looks so good on the desk. I will say it was a bit tighter to build in than the Lian Li 011 Dynamic, and while I'm not the biggest fan of the vertical GPU mount, I still like the overall aesthetic. I actually picked this up refurbished from Height's website for around $140, and I've got to say that it looks brand new. I haven't noticed a single blemish. The next update to this PC is the famous, or maybe infamously expensive, NVIDIA RTX 3080. This is the 10GB version that I picked up from someone on Facebook Marketplace for around $450, which at the time was a very solid deal. It might not be as good of a deal in today's market, but I haven't really had any issues with it at all. It plays most AAA titles at or above 60 FPS at 4K, and with DLSS and upscaling, I'm able to run some games at 4K 120 or 140/40 FPS depending on the title. Now I know I could have gone with a more powerful card, but for the price at the time, and since this is the 10GB version, I figured this would be more than powerful for what I do. Other than that, all I did was swap the black and white Corsair LL120 fans, orientations, and called it a day. And lastly, that brings us to lighting, my favorite aspect about any and all desk setups. Now, I've already mentioned a few things, namely the Govee glides on the walls and the RGB IC strip behind the pegboard, but there are a few more lights that I haven't touched on. The first of which is the monitor backlight and the underglow of my desk. A few years ago, Govee sent me their first version of the DreamView RGB kit. This features a camera that's supposed to mount on the top of the monitor and comes with two RGB light bars and a diffused flexible LED bar of sorts to mount to the back of the monitor. The idea here is that the camera would pick up the different lighting scenes from content on your monitor and change the lighting accordingly. It's supposed to make viewing content more immersive. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of this implementation, especially since you can just get an HDMI kit to do the same thing, but I didn't want this to go to waste. So I decided to configure it in my setup, albeit via a more unorthodox method. First off, I toyed around with the idea of putting these light bars on either side of the Grobe-made desk shelf, but I felt like it cluttered up the space a little bit too much. So naturally, I grabbed my small handsaw and sawed off the legs of the RGB bars. I used a bit of VHB tape and mounted them directly underneath my desk to give it some nice and diffused underglow, and because these get so bright, they look amazing. From there, I took the other part of the kit, namely the flexible rope RGB thing, and replaced my pre-existing Govee neon rope with it. However, this may have been a mistake. This has to be one of the worst implementations of a mounting solution for a product that I've ever seen. The way this works is that there are these 3M adhesive mounting clips that go directly on the monitor, but unfortunately, they don't hold the RGB bar down very well, and it easily pops out. To add further insult to injury, the clips themselves have these flexible rubber gaskets to keep the RGB bar in place, but unfortunately they are also adhesive, and since the light also gets quite warm, it ends up melting the adhesive and they fall off. So you'll probably notice that parts of the RGB are just hanging down behind the monitor, not attached to anything at all. So in the future, I'm going to get a normal RGB IC strip and replace this terrible product with it. Now, in order for this to work, I still have to tap into the camera from the DreamView, so I have both the RGB light bars and the monitor RGB connected to the camera, which isn't being used at all. Now, what is great about most of Govi's products is their software. Even though I'm not using the camera, I'm still able to change up the lighting in the way I see fit and use both products as if they were standalone ones. So while I'm not a huge fan of this first version of the DreamView, I was able to modify it a bit and make it work for me. Now, while I'd like to say that's where Govi's troubles have ended, unfortunately, it isn't. Govi sent out their desk LED gaming strip, which to be fair is meant to go on the front of your desk and not the back, and I'll be honest, in some setups it looks really good. However, I wanted to use it on the back of my desk to add even more diffusion to the wall behind it. But unfortunately, this LED strip is just too dim to make that look even remotely good. I did rock with it for almost 6 months before I changed it out, but it really wasn't meant for that purpose. So I decided to replace it with Govi's M1 RGB IC strip that has 60 LEDs per meter, making for a much brighter and smoother lighting configuration, especially when it comes to lighting animation. However, in the process of carefully removing the Govi neon desk strip, it actually just broke. Mind you, I did not yank on this or tug at it at all. I very carefully removed it. For whatever reason, a bunch of the LEDs just started turning the wrong color or simply just stopped working altogether. It's just not a great design, and to be honest, I'm pretty disappointed, especially since I've come to trust the quality and reputation of Govi's products. This is just another miss and something that I hope they fix, because everything else from them I've used has been great. But honestly, that about wraps it up. This office setup is the culmination of all of the many setups that I've had in the past, and while it's always changing and evolving, I'm really happy with how it turned out. As with any of my videos, feel free to drop any questions down below and comment the words Nintendo Wii if you made it all the way through the video. Lastly, I know it's been a really long time since I've posted here on this channel, and I'm not looking to apologize for my absence. Life happens, and as I've gotten older, I've had less and less time to pursue this hobby. That said, I'm not going away from YouTube anytime soon, and I'd like to make more videos in the future. Funny enough, we're actually going to be moving fairly shortly, which means I'll have another space to set up all over again. As an aside, I've also gotten into cars a lot more in the past couple of years, and I'm thinking about making some content around that just with my own personal flair. If that's something that you guys are at all interested in, let me know down below. Do you think I should post it here or somewhere else or on another channel? Just let me know. Anyways, that's finally going to wrap it up. This is Luke, and as always, I'll catch you guys later. Peace.